Assalamualaikum everyone. We were earlier looking at the inflation, how the Islamic Bank would be impacting the economy under an inflationary pressure. And we see that the Islamic Bank, being a bank that was set up within a dual financial system, they will behave in a procyclical manner, which is not much different from what we see happening in conventional banking. But now we are looking at the economic recession, which is forecasted or predicted by many economists to be taking place in 2023 and the year to come, in view of the policy pursued by the Feds, which is to increase the interest rate in order to fight inflation. Inflation has been around 9% in the US, and this will pose a great danger to the economy if nothing is done to contain the inflation. As we know that higher inflation would mean higher debt servicing for the US government. Presently, the US debt is about $31 trillion. And you will take the US government to spend about $600 billion a year to pay for the interest. Then further increase in the interest rate would intensify the debt burden, and that is why it is highly important that this rate, the inflation rate, is to be cut down to 2%. At the same time, you know also that higher price level will increase the cost of production and the cost of operating businesses, and many companies will be reporting exploding expenditure, and that will reduce their earning, and this can hurt the stock market, and this will ultimately produce collapse in the stock market as well as the bond market, as we know that higher interest rate will pull down bond prices, and this can cause a loss to the bond investment in any bank. That is the reason why the so-called critical stage where the government of the world is trying to cut down interest rate. But cutting down by increasing interest rate. But by raising interest rate, that can mean triggering a credit crunch and a recession. And that will be another, calamity that may befall nation when they fall into a recession. So these are the two, what we call tragedy that can besiege the economies that is driven by interest rate. And that's what will happen to the Islamic Bank if the economy is under a slowdown. What will the Islamic Bank be doing, especially in their asset management, to take part in the building of the economy? Because if the Islamic Bank is to behave similar to the conventional bank, that is to behave in a procyclical manner, then that is another disappointing and tragedy to see how an Islamic entity may be behaving similar to a riba-based banking company. But just to look at some of the basic economic exposition of recession, let us just take the note here. Recession is partly caused by the fall in aggregate demand, that is the fall in consumer spending, which is consumption, and the fall in business spending, that is investment. Of course, recession can also be, the theory of recession is much related to the Keynesian analysis. And Keynesian theory will say that it is the demand factor that is causing the fall in the GDP. So in order to move towards recovery, the central bank will always pursue an expansionary monetary policy, which is a counter-cyclical policy to stimulate the economy by increasing the money supply, right? So the money supply can be increased by cutting down interest rate through, monetary easing and the open market operation, as well as by reducing the reserve requirement. And the reserve requirement will release more excess reserve to the bank so that the bank can make more loans. But as we all know, that banks will see the recession as a bad time to make loans, as this loan may end up in a default. So to prevent this from happening, bank will put most of their assets in cash and bonds, which is to protect the interest of the shareholders and the depositors, because if the bank is to make more and more loans in a recession, then the huge default, may eat up banking capital, and the bank may fall into insolvency. So in order to protect the interests of the shareholders, the private interest is top priority. Thus, the bank will pursue a procyclical policy that is not making loans, and that will further increase or intensify the recession. So it looks like the private entity, which is the banking companies, will be acting in contrast to the interests and objective of the central bank. So the central bank is trying to stimulate the economy, but the commercial bank is doing the opposite. That is by not supporting that effort of stimulating the economy, and it is done by not making loans, because that serves the best interest of the shareholder, and that will make the bank to behave in a fashion that will further damage the economy. And what will happen to Islamic banking? So we can see here that, as I have mentioned quite a number of times earlier, that as the Islamic bank were established within a dual system, at the same time, the Islamic bank was set up as a deposit-taking bank that uses borrowed fund to make murabaha and tawaruq. So by using deposit funds, that is the deposit to make murabaha, the Islamic bank are subjected to Basel capital requirement, which will make it further difficult for the Islamic bank to do equity financing, to do mudarabah, to do real sale and real lease, as these contracts are inherently risky, thus subjected to high capital requirements. So the Islamic bank are not able, to diverge into new area because using mudarabah and through sale and through leasing, because this will trigger an enormously high capital requirement on them. So the Islamic bank have no option but to use untrue or malafide murabaha, meaning murabaha whereby there is no sale, and tawaruq, where both of these product, malafide murabaha, which is practiced in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and in many other part of the UAE, and tawaruq, which is practiced in Malaysia, in Brunei, and also in some parts of the UAE and Middle East, where both of them behave like a loan. So accordingly, the Islamic bank, because they are not able to do the traditional contract due to the high capital requirement, so we are not blaming them, for not doing mudarabah and musharakah, but because of that, the situation where they were established within a dual system, there is no other way, but to, do whatever is available. So accordingly, for example, the Islamic Bank will pursue the safety principle in asset allocation during a recession. So the safety principle is top priority. Just like any conventional banks, thus this procyclical behavior will make the recession even worse. Thus, the Islamic Bank, under a deposit regime, is adding, instability to the economy. Of course, when we look at the balance sheet, hypothetical balance sheet of a procyclical bank, so from 100 billion deposit, damana or tawaruq deposit, only 10 billion is given as murabaha, maybe to the deserving customer, the top customer who have collateral and ability to pay, and the rest of the deposit will be put into cash, 70 billion, and sukuk for liquidity, 20 billion. So to conclude, the Islamic Bank will make the recession even worse by cutting down more murabaha. You should instead give more mudarabah, but this is impossible to do under a deposit regime, but possible to exploit under an investment account system. So inshallah, we will try to see how asset management can be pursued when funding is coming from the investment account principle. So we can stop here today. I see you again, inshallah, and please don't forget to comment and to subscribe. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.